Last class period, we went over experiential learning theory, and I told you that active learning was a subset of experiential learning, meaning it's a method that can be used in experiential learning. We covered experiential learning, the cycle that Kolb created from John Dewey's definition of experiential learning, and Kolb kind of defined the major elements in a cycle, and we talked about how zone of proximal development was linked to that cycle, so we took it all the way back to week 2 there. But now let's talk about active learning itself. Now, active learning doesn't have to be a hands-on activity. I mean, it can be skill-based activities like we're using in class, but it could be a weekly template that you filled out. It could be group projects. It could be the discussions that you do at the end of the class. It could be multiple assignments in one. It's anything that keeps the student actively engaged. So don't necessarily think about it as a theory. Think about it as a method of a theory. So it's a method that is used in experiential learning, but it's not exclusive just to experiential learning. It can be used on its own. It's anything that keeps you actively engaged. Think of a biology class where you use maybe a mannequin. That's active learning, right? Can it be used in experiential learning? Absolutely. But it doesn't have to be. It could be flashcards that keep you actively engaged. Anything that motivates you and keeps you engaged in the learning process is active learning. A think, pair, share, where you're getting in, you're brainstorming, y'all are thinking about ideas, you're sharing those ideas, you're pairing them up, you're seeing how they're linked. That's all active learning. My main way of using active learning in a class, if you wanted to dissect how my courses are using this concept or this method, would be think of the quizzes. They're only used for the first 10 minutes. Yes, I use them for classroom management, but it's to keep you actively engaged. If you didn't go out and learn on your own, I'm going to keep you focused for those first 10 minutes if you want those points. Well, what that does for me is now you are engaged because you've completed the quiz, and I know you've at least been introduced to the topic before I start talking about it in the lecture. So then I get up on the board, I'll draw out whatever the main topic it is, and try to give you something visual about it. So that's another way for me to keep you actively engaged. I'm not just lecturing, I'm telling you how this theory or concept is going to be connected to the activity we're about to do. Then I would model the activity, show you how to put it together and what I want you to do and how I want you to film it and what I want you to cover in that film. Another active method of teaching, because now you're actively engaged on the same concept but just in a different way. And then after you edit it and chop it together, that allows you to analyze and evaluate what you did and how it was connected to create a video of your own, again, active learning. And then you've got to write a discussion. So not only have we covered all learning styles in that, but we've also given you several different methods that kind of chop the class up to keep you actively engaged. Because if I taught these theories and I just got up and lectured to you for an hour and 15 minutes, you would be bored out of your mind. I would be bored out of my mind. By taking small little active methods of teaching, I can keep you focused for 10 minutes on that topic in a different way. And then I can give you 10 or 15 minutes of a lecture. And then I can give you 15 minutes of an activity, 15, 20 minutes of activity. And then another 15, 20 minutes of breaking that down and editing it. And then another 5 minutes of writing up a paragraph to reflect on what you just did individually. So you're taking in those discussions what y'all did as a group, but you're doing an individual discussion. So that keeps you actively engaged, but I break up the time to keep you motivated. So that's the big draw of active learning, is its connection to motivation. And when we get to the second half of the semester, we'll start talking about more of that affective side of Bloom's taxonomy. So far we've just covered the cognitive piece of Bloom's and the psychomotor, but in the second half of the semester, we're going to start talking about motivation and its effects on behavior. And that would be a different domain of Bloom's. Now, active learning is connected to Bloom's, and you'll see why I think these hands-on activities are so important. So let's look at this chart real quick, and this is why I teach the way I do. 10% of the people, this is what research shows, and these percentages change over time, but they're roughly the same percentage or close to it. They don't vary that much is what I'm getting at. 10% of people report that they remember what they read, and that would be considered passive learning. 20% remember what they hear. This is what they remember. 30% just visual information is presented to them. But if you combine seeing and hearing, 50% will retain that information. 70% of what they have to present on, what you have to talk about and write about, that's why we have the discussions at the end, and your videos are like little presentations. So that's why I have the video editing involved, not just as an active learning strategy, because I know you'll retain more because you have to analyze and evaluate what you just did to create something from it, and 90% of what they do. Again, creating something, doing some sort of activity that's hands-on, you're going to retain way more. So if the more of these elements I can include in my class, the more you're going to retain. And they all revolve around the main learning concept of the day. You're just getting repetition with it over and over and over in different ways. And you can see how that's connected to Bloom's taxonomy here, but I overlaid it here. So passive learning would get us all the way up. If you remember back to Bloom's taxonomy when I discussed it, I said application was kind of like the halfway point, the connection between passive learning and active learning. So taking a multiple choice test, yes, it can be kind of active because you're actively engaged, but really it's closer to passive learning. You're remembering, you're understanding, you might be able to apply what you learned. But if we did that in an active role, like with something hands-on, yes, you're definitely going to be able to apply. That's going to help you analyze and evaluate the process and create something of your own. Now, here's what I would typically draw out on the board. So if we were in a face-to-face class, this is going from simple to complex activities. And this is what I want you to talk about in your video. So for today's activity, if you were taking a primitive fire course, we would be doing a fire roll. Prior to this, we've done activities that relate to spindles and fireboards. And anything that we learned prior to that were how to set up like the hand drill or the bow drill, elements that we would have needed. And so what I want you to do is talk about how the fire roll is used to get you to these upper levels of learning through active learning. So you've got to talk about how active learning was important. So reflecting on what you did, doing some sort of self-assessment helps you get to an understanding here. So that would be like your quizzes. Doing the discussions helps me see that you're applying what you've learned. But the hands-on activities that we do in class help you analyze and evaluate. Some of you are going to be able to do this on your own, but some are going to need experiential learning. You're going to have to ask me to help you. And so that's what I want you to talk about in the video is how did active learning activities like the fire roll help you get all the way up here to the upper levels of learning? And did your group need experiential learning? Could you do this on active learning alone, just by itself on how it is set up? Or did you need help with that hands-on activity and guidance from the instructor? Were you able to rely on past experience from previous activities? Or was that not enough and then you had to have the instructor help you with this fire roll activity? This is a fairly simple hands-on activity. It's not as complex as a bow drill, but I'm going to give you very little guidance here. And we're going to use this as a true active learning method to see if you can figure it out on your own. If you can't, then we can fall back on true experiential learning like an apprenticeship, where I'll come in, look at what you're doing, point out the issues, but I want to see if you can do it on your own. And that's what you're making your video about. Were you able to do it, this active learning activity, on your own, or did you need help from the teacher? And you can obviously see the connection with what I just described with zone of proximal development. So this fire roll activity, can you do it independently? If not, did you need experiential learning, help from the teacher or your peers to complete this and make an ember? That's really what we're talking about in the video. So again, and I know I keep repeating myself, when you make these videos, this is more about the learning concept than it is the skill. Yes, you want to show your attempts at the activity, but what you talk about in the video, what you describe, even if it's through subtitles, needs to be about the learning concept. And for today, it's going to be active learning. And if active learning didn't work for you, did you have to fall back on experiential learning or guidance from the instructor?